Hello everybody. Today we're going to have a go at painting a horse in a field setting, but I'm going to concentrate on the drawing of the horse initially. Drawing horses is difficult, and I would definitely recommend having a go at sketching onto a separate piece of paper first before you go anywhere near your watercolour paper. So I'm going to try and show you how I'm going to sketch my horse from the start. If you use other reference, whatever photograph you're working from, the same things will apply when you're starting to draw. So I would suggest have a practice, use a 2B or a 3B pencil, and what we're going to do is we're going to start plenty of space around us, and we're going to start from the centre of the horse. So we're not working on the extremities, we're starting at the centre. And I'm going to begin by placing the withers of the horse, which is that sort of mound at the top of the neck, if you like, on my horse, because it's feeding, so it's grazing. I'm going to start with that position. So I'm going to mark that as being the top of the horse, and actually I can see that the rump of the horse is at the highest point. It's on about the same level, so I can sort of do myself a light line to indicate that. And we're going to get the sort of central torso of the horse, if you like, in first. So I'm going to suggest looking at lines and using all the muscle form as well. So I'm going to start by coming round the barrel of the belly, if you like, of the horse. Come round and sketch a light line to indicate where I think the sort of underneath of the horse's stomach wants to be. So I'm just going to suggest a line. Now there is a line of muscle here that's coming through, so I want to put that muscle in because it comes round. Okay, and we're going to divide everything into shapes. There's the dip on the back before you come up to the croup, or that high point on the back of the horse. So I'm just going to suggest that sort of dip in between the withers and the croup, and then there's another line of muscle. So I'm just looking all the time from my reference to my drawing and just lightly suggesting. I hope you can see these lines. I'm putting them in very lightly to begin with because I don't want to put anything definite. These are muscle lines, or sort of I'm using the sort of lines of the muscle into the top of the leg, the inside of the thigh, if you like, and suggesting where I think that be. So this distance is really important. If I make that too long, I'm going to lengthen the horse too much. So I'm thinking, suggest that, and the whole overall angle where I'm going back, if I can put a line in just so that I know. Think about hands on a clock, and it's going towards sort of 5 o'clock, so the overall line of that leg is going back that way, and the front leg, the line of it is also going back at 5 o'clock, so I'm going to suggest that as well. Not finishing any one bit, just sort of moving across. So I'm going to come to the front of the sort of shoulder, if you like, of the horse, and look at the line here, and the angle is going across at, no, it's not sort of totally 7 o'clock, it's going across there, point of shoulder, which is here, and then again there's this sort of shape of muscle coming through. So I'm going to suggest that, and the top of the horse's leg here, I can see the muscle coming down and going backwards. So we're building it up, working from side to side, backwards and forwards. I'm going to come around to the rump and look at the distance from top of this thigh to where I think the start of that tail should be, looking across at this distance, and I'm going to suggest that. So we come up, look at the distance up to that the croup, and then back down to where the tail starts. Suggest the position of the tail, and then I can see that the rump goes around beyond. So again, I can suggest where that is, mark that point, come back to the front of the horse again, and we'll look at the line of the neck. So I can see the distance here from the point of the shoulder to the neck, so I can mark where that is, and look at where the neck of the horse is dropping down and suggest that line. So we've got these two lines falling away. The belly of the horse, I know it goes behind the tail, but I'm just going to put that in. So we've got the sort of central torso, so rather than doing an outline and then fitting everything in, we've gone from the inside and we're working out. Now what will start to happen is you have to start looking at negative spaces, which is the gap between areas. So this sort of gap between the front and the back legs, the gap on the inside of the two back legs, and then you'll start to see if you might need to make adjustments and things are right or wrong. So I'm looking at the tail on my horse, and if I take a straight line down from there, you can see sort of the gap starting between the two back legs. It's like an arch, so I'm going to suggest that, and it's in fact higher. It's not as low as the belly, it's a bit higher up, so the arch needs to start here. And if I look at the angle on the side of the arch, I'm just going to sketch that in and look at the shape of the arch to see if I'm getting this right, and looking at the curve round to the sort of hock, or equivalent to the ankle in a human, round to the back here, and that's where there's like a joint. So if I just do a little circle there for the joint, comes in, and then the angle changes. So I'm just going to do a line to show the change of angle. So that's just gone 6 o'clock, but not quite 7 o'clock. Looking at the gap across here, have I got that about right? There's the joint over there. Now if I look at the back, that leg, it gets very narrow across here. This needs to bow out a bit more. It gets very narrow. There's a little bit of a slight bit of muscle there, and then out for the rump, so I can adjust how big I've got the rump there. Come down, and then look at this angle carrying on, and look at that length as well. So I might not have got this right straight off, but I'm looking at the angle, I'm coming across a bit too much, so I need to adjust that and look at that distance down towards the pastern, which is this slightly more bulbous section here, before we suggest where the hoof is going to go. The shape here, I'm just going to indicate, I think that's about as long as the leg should be. Nothing is set in stone, okay? Everything is flexible. And if I look at the position of the angle from this hoof to the other hoof is slightly longer, so if I put a little line across, it would suggest that maybe even more shallow than that would be the length of the other leg. So again, I need to look at this angle down to that sort of bulbous bit there, and I'm just going to do it as straight lines. There are ins and outs on these, but I'm going to draw them as a straight line first, round to the fetlock, front of the hoof, suggest that shape. Right, I don't want to put too much detail in because I may well have to move this back up here. More muscle tone at the front. I know the tail goes behind, so I can't see too much, but I'm going to come to the front now, and I've got to look at the position of this hoof and look at that angle going across there. So the other hoof is, the bottom of the other hoof is kind of, if I take a straight line across, it's going to come down here somewhere, but I need to look at the distance between the two, and I would suggest that it's about there. So that leg is going to come down, postern, curve round, around about there. So when I look at the joint here, you can't see, the leg's so straight you can't see the joint too much, but it's around about there. So I'm just going to indicate that for the moment and get the other foot hoof in position. You can see the knee, see the other joint there, and looking at this negative space, have I got that right? In fact, no, I haven't. That needs to be almost straight. Round to the front of the hoof, and then slight triangular shape. No point in drawing loads of detail in the initial sketch. I'm just attempting to get the anatomy right first. Once I've got the anatomy right, then I can worry about everything else. So if I take a straight line up from the front of that hoof, I've got to see if I've got it in line with the right part, and I have. That's not bad at all. So then I can see the position of all four hooves, and then look at the distance to the sort of muzzle of the horse. It's actually just slightly above there, so where it's grazing, its muzzle's going to come about there. Look at the distance from the front of that hoof to the start of the muzzle, which is about there, and simplify this shape. So I'm just going to do it as a box shape to start with, or a series of box shapes. You've got the jaw, the distance where the lips of the horse are, then you've got the start of the jaw, and I need to look at from that joint to where the jaw begins, the gap. So it's the negative space. I'm looking at this negative space. I've got the jaw shape coming round, and then the angle changes. So come round the jaw, I've got the angle coming back there, then we go out, the head goes back. I know this looks peculiar, but I'm just doing it by shape first. Position of the ear. Now I just need to look, is the ear, if I come across there, that's not too bad. So indicate where I think the ear might go. And that is going to be where the eye would be positioned. It'll make a bit more sense if I get a bit more shape into the mouth area where the horse is grazing. There's a lot of muscle tone. But yeah, I don't think that's too bad. Back. Okay, and then I've got a little bit of, if I follow the line here, then you see a little bit of the inside of that leg coming through there. And the tail will ultimately, it's flicking its tail, so the tail is ultimately going to go around up here, and then it's also going to come right the way across. So I'm just going to put a few lines in so that I can see I've got the shape. Obviously we have the mane of the horse, but again, no point in drawing lots of detail into that, just roughly the position. Then stand back, look at your drawing and see if the hooves look like it's in the right place. Check your negative spaces. Are these gaps too big, too small? I think there's something not quite right. I might have got the legs slightly too splayed at the back, but I can adjust. Look, see if some of the limbs are too thin. But the thing with a horse is it does look like its legs are too thin to support its weight. The important thing also is check the length of the limbs. Have you got, look at the distance on the depth of the body, and then count that into the legs. See if you've made the legs too short in relationship to the body of the horse. But if you're fairly happy with your initial sketch, to the scale that you want it to be, draw the horse first up onto your watercolour paper at the size that you want the horse to be. Don't work too small. I've scaled my horse up from the photograph that I was working from, so that the horse is a decent size to paint, and then fit any background that you want around that. Now that I've drawn the basic outline of my horse, which is the centre of attention, and a very vague hint of the background. Now you can do whatever you want with the background behind your horse, but I'm going to have you know, a sense of the stables behind it and some of the greenery around. So I have mixed a palette of colours up. I'll just bring that in to show you. I'm not going to talk about colour mixing because you can put whatever you want around the horse, but I am going to get the background in first. So I've got a selection of greys mixed for the stable block, and I've got some raw sienna for the pathway, and then a selection of greens, but some decent puddles of colour ready to go. That's what I'm going to begin doing now. So I'm going to start at the top of the picture so that I don't bring my hands in it, but again, as always, with the lightest washes first. So a nice big size 12 brush, and I'm going to come in with a series of greys. I want to do wet in wet. I want to keep this fairly loose, and I want to drop some colours in, so I need to work relatively quickly. So this is very pale grey mixed to start with, and I'm going to drop other colours into this. But where the sunlight is really bright on the buildings, I'm just moving in with some more water to stop that from running too far. I'm taking the grey right over where I will want greenery, but I'm going to just drop in a little bit of raw sienna to give a hint of interesting colour coming through, and there's even a tiny bit of warmth in the grey, so I'm going to put a little bit of my alizarin crimson, just drop a bit of that in. Right, leave it. I'm not going to fiddle about with that anymore at the moment. Come straight down, and I'm going to be avoiding the horse itself and working really wet in wet. So sticking with my big brush and just painting. No need to mask the horse out at all. It's a nice large shape, so I can paint around it, but I want to get this really pale raw sienna down first, and then I've got a kind of maroony colour mixed, which I am going to bring into the trees. So the idea with this is I'm going to link the colour between the pathway and the some of the trees behind. So I want that connection between the colour. So this sort of maroony tone I'm putting down into my raw sienna, but bear in mind that this will dry really pale. It's very warm in here, so I need to work quite fast, and I'm keeping my washes nice and pale. My greenery is going to come in over the top, so I'm actually not even going to wait for that to dry. I'm just going to bring some of that grass, pale grass. I'm going in, these are all my lightest colours, so I've got some really pale greens mixed for the grass. Now, if you find your washes are drying too fast, wet the paper first so that you're working wet in wet. So clean water around first. If you're not so confident about moving really quickly, and particularly if you're worried about coming in between and around the horse, what you can always do is have a smaller brush. So this is about a size 8, and I'm just going to come in with a smaller brush in between the legs of the horse. it's like juggling plates, you've got to keep everything moving at the same time. So this is just to get a really nice pale wash. Now because the horse is chestnut, I don't have to worry too much about if I wash over the limbs of the horse. If you decide to paint, for instance, a grey, then that's where you really do have to think about not taking any greenery, foliage or anything else across, because obviously you'll have problems lifting that out later on. So I want a nice mottled effect. In fact, I'm going to even bring in a little bit of my raw sienna while this is still damp. Bring some raw sienna in, so it's not one flat colour. Always much more interesting if there's a number of colours going on. So we're working fast. Come around the back, pick up some water, and I'm just going to take this across where my pathway was. I've tested all of these colours out in advance, so I know just how strong they're going to be when they dry. It's really important because you don't want, having spent all that time getting the drawing of your horse right, you don't want to spoil it by going in with colours you're not happy with initially. So I'm just using my brush to mop up excess colour, and then I'll go back to my raw sienna. I want a little bit of interest in there, so I'm just going to drop some raw sienna in while that's wet. But you must be able to see a sheen on the paper to drop colours in wet. If it's dried too fast, then stop, don't worry about it. I've got a slightly stronger green, and I might be able to just get away with dropping a little bit of that in while it's still wet. I'm working off my big brush again now, just to have a bit of variation, particularly in the foreground. All the washes are fairly loose. My interest is in the horse itself, so the background is there, but I'm not going to concentrate and have loads of detail. But that's just how I'm opting to do this. So I need to wait for that to dry so that I'm not putting my arm through it, and then I can go back and concentrate on just getting a bit of colour on the last remaining bit of white that's up here. But I've isolated the horse is there, and later on I can then concentrate just on the horse itself. I'm at the point of starting to paint the horse now, so with the chestnut horse that I'm going to be working on, I've put together a selection of colours ready, mixed in advance, because I'm going to be working wet and wet on the horse itself. So I've got Gamboge and alizarin crimson, burnt sienna, Van Dyke brown, sepia, neutral, and then Windsor blue, very watery, with a tiny bit of Van Dyke brown just to mute it, because where the light's falling on some of the darker areas of the horse, you're getting this sort of almost blue little sort of highlight, if you like. And then I've got some neutral. These colours are not going to be, some of them will go on individually, but some of them in the darker areas like the sepia and neutral, they'll get bled in together. So I'll do a combination of the mix of them together. And also with the Van Dyke brown, I will take some of the Van Dyke brown and water it down for some of the slightly sort of paler areas on the sort of skin of the horse. So that's my palette of colours, all mixed in advance, and most of them fairly strongly mixed. I'm going to begin painting the horse, but as you can see, I've put my own background in to the scene. It's not exactly as the reference that I'm using, but I've sort of cut certain things out. It's not totally finished, but there's more than enough there, and I can go back later on and, you know, add a little bit more if I want to. I've not done anything with the washes around the horse. I will do a little bit of something, but I want to concentrate on the horse itself. So, starting with that, I'm going to use my lightest mix. Now, this is a combination of I'm going for the lightest sort of tone on the horse. With my big brush, I've got some Van Dyke Brown, and I'm going to start with the main torso of the horse. Use my big brush, but I will be transferring to a smaller brush. It is extremely warm, so I'm not going to try and do too much of the horse in any one section, because if I do, it's just going to dry on me. So I'm going to concentrate on the main torso of the horse and drop colours into that wet in wet. So I'm picking up some very light colour first. I'll just wash away the colour where I want to. Leave some very light areas. That is, it's almost drying instantaneously. So this is going to be quite interesting with the wet in wet. Bringing in Van Dyke Browns and some of the yellow combinations. Using water to move the colour around over the horse. What I will have to do, because it is drying so very quickly, is I will have to just keep going back and re-wetting with clean water where I want to drop in stronger colour. I'll bring some of the orangey tones through. I'm ignoring the tail, by the way, by and large, because I can come back and paint into that later on. So I just want to load colour in to the areas that are deeper. Because it's drying so fast, I just need to fade the colour on the leg away. And I'm going to use some water to soften edges, just clean water to soften edges. I've got some burnt sienna, I'm going to drop some of that in. These are reasonably strong mixes of colour because I know how much lighter it will dry. Now, if I don't keep this moving around the rump, I'm going to get edges everywhere. So I'm going to bring the colour in and take it right over. The only bit of the tail that I'm going to avoid is where I know that it goes quite pale. So I'm just going to leave a section of tail that's just white paper and wash that chestnut colour, the burnt sienna, down into the leg of the horse. Doesn't matter if you can see there's a cauliflower forming there where I've sort of gone back into it. I'm not worried about that because I'm going to be building up layers of colour. I can come back round here and start dropping more colour in. Because of the hot conditions, I probably will get cauliflowers forming quite a lot on this, but I'm not going to worry about that too much. I'll put a little bit of alizarin crimson because I think there's a slight redness that's coming through around the rump there, so I'll just drop some of that in while it's still wet. Back to my orange, so I'm feeding the colour in all the time, trying to get it to merge together rather than be stripy. Now there are areas of highlight, so when you want to get highlight in, rather than paint round it, I'm using a clean brush that's just damp. And say I wanted to get my area of highlight in, lift the colour off, and that way I can get a soft highlight rather than a stripy highlight. I just keep cleaning the brush in between and then drying the brush, and that way I can get a highlight on that rump. But I will probably have to re-wet the whole area and then go back and drop more colour in, but I just want to lift off for the highlight, at least some of it. And there's a bit of highlight catching on the back of the bottom, if you like. Just there. The tail will come in darker later, so this is the beginnings of my first layer of colour, and I'm going to continue on doing the same thing. I can come down the leg, dropping the colours into the leg and down onto the head of the horse, but these are the lightest colours. I've obviously got to build up with much darker colour. The good thing about most of the earth tones is that if something's gone a bit too strong, like for instance I've lost some of the highlight at the front of the leg here, I'm hoping that what I'll be able to do is just with a bit of clean water pull that area back a bit and just blot it with my kitchen paper to get some light back in it again. So that's the good thing about most of the earth colours, is that they are not staining, and you will be able to just either soften edges or lift back colour for highlight if it's gone in a little bit too strong. So that's why I'm not panicking about certain sections. There's lovely highlights around this sort of hip of the horse here, but I'm not going to worry about that yet because I actually need to get the colour darker there, then I'll lift off the highlight afterwards. But I'm going to keep building up the colour. Move on to the back leg here, and I'm going to go straight in because it's totally in shadow. I'm going to go straight in with the Van Dyke Brown on, this is about size 8 brush. Get some colour down first, then I can move to a smaller brush to come in and get a nice crisp edge on the outline. And it's at this point I'm going to make sure that that outline is very subtle, going in and out for all the muscle tone. It's not just a dead straight line. So that outer edge is really important to get the structure. So I've got a size 4 brush with an excellent point to cut in really close. And then before it has a chance to dry, which it almost is, I'm dropping some sepia in. And I'm actually just going to wash that dark across a little bit so I don't get a totally hard line, but the tail is going to sit on top, so it doesn't really matter. And then I've also got a little bit of neutral, and I'm going to just touch the neutral in and let that run down as well, just hinting at the shape, and mop up the excess colour around the hock, and then some diluted neutral which I can wash over and let the colour bleed down. Now there is some white around this lower section around where I think it's the fetlock. Not an expert on horse anatomy, but I think it's the fetlock area. So I don't want to lose all of the white paper at that point. But there is also a little bit of brown coming in. So while it's wet, just touching that in. There is darker sections on here, but I will let this dry. Not that that's going to take long, in fact it almost is already. More diluted round where the hoof is at the front. So I can go back with my neutral, and I think this is dried enough for me to come in with a little bit of dark onto dry paper so that I get more of the sort of muscle tone coming through. It's very dark under there, so this is quite strongly mixed neutral. It's just a dark grey. And we're starting to get the shape beginning to emerge. I just need to do various tones around that area. There's shadow being cast on my horse cross, so I've actually got quite a strong shadow line that comes all the way across, so I can even put that in at this stage and then move it about with some water. And we'll see how that dries. I've got to go much darker at the top of the leg as well, lots more dark which I need to touch in. But we've got the beginnings of some of the tones around that sort of foot area. Just keep going in until you get the tones as you want. The shadow will come in later, but that's just to show you on this particular leg, and I do need to get some more reddish tone. All the colours I'm working with, apart from sepia, are transparent, so I can glaze them on top. So where I want to get a little bit more of that chestnut colour coming through, I can glaze my burnt sienna over the top and bring those orange, sort of almost orangey tones through a bit more, because the colour underneath is bone dry, and I can build that up. So hopefully we start to get a little bit more of the richness of colour. So I will continue to do that with the other legs and get the first washes on the head of the horse. As you can see, I have now worked my way across 3 of the legs and the head of the horse, but I'm just going to try and demonstrate on this front leg what I've started to do, using all my colours, diluting them to various degrees. What I have done before is put the pale blue down on the sort of lower half of the leg, because I want little bits of that light sort of blue to show through. So I'm going to start at the top and begin to work through, and some of it's going to be small lines softened with water to begin to get some shape into the muscle tone. So a little bit of my Van Dyke brown, just a small amount, and then straight into some water, and using the water just to soften the edge. So we're now trying to get some of the supple muscle forms into place. I've got all this dark tone to put in later, but this is just the little bit at a time, straight into water and control the shape with water so that I don't lose all the highlight. So I'll come round onto the back part of the leg and run a larger amount of colour down, and then again using water to soften the edges, because I still want to maintain the highlight on the front of the leg, but I can actually run that into the top of the other leg here, so that goes off into shadow, so I can take some of that Van Dyke brown through into that section. I'll move to a smaller brush so that as I come down the leg I've got more control with a smaller pointed brush to see what I'm doing. So I can just finish that bit off. And then I can move into my grey tone, start bringing some of that grey through. Again, straight into water because I don't want that to be too solid, and I don't want to lose all of the blue. So I'm just going to use a little bit of water to soften that highlight. Then carry on down the front of the leg. And just introduce a slightly stronger mix, bleed that in, let it run across and up into the back of the knee. And again, straight into water. Just ease that up. If I haven't gone dark enough, I can always go back and do the process again, but I'm just trying to control the shape. I don't want a dark line, so straight into water again. I want some of these highlights to come through, so I'm trying to leave bits of my blue. My highlights might end up being too light, but later on it's easy enough to tone those down, so I'd rather leave them be too light and then be able to lose them later on than to be spending my time trying to pick out highlights all the time. So they might be a bit bright at the moment, but I can lose them later. I've got a little bit of a wobble on the back of that there, so I'll just use a little bit of water, blot it away, and I can go back in again. I'm just using neutral at this point, which is that dark grey, and small bits of wet in wet. I can see I do need to go darker here, but that's dried there, so I can put a small bit in and then straight onto my water and soften it in with water. And then run it down to where I was working lower down. So the shape's beginning to develop. But gradually we'll come back up to the top again of the leg and get some more dark tone on the back leg. And again, using a good point so that I can come up to my edges. Okay. And then I need to run some more dark inside here. So again, water on the brush and get some shadow. Fade it out with water. So we're starting to develop the shape, and I'm going to go on and just pick out, get some darks into this sort of shoulder area, and go back and glaze colours over to get some stronger colour around the rump and under the belly of the horse. And then once that's done, I can concentrate on the mane and the tail. As you can see, I have spent some time putting more glazes of colour. I've used that combination of sort of orange, glazing orange and glazing a little bit of alizarin crimson and burnt sienna on top of the washes that I put to bring that sort of chestnut colouring out. Although some of my highlights are not as bright as they are in the reference I'm using, I think I'm quite happy with that. Some areas will need to go darker, but what I want to do now is work on the mane and the tail, and then I've got all elements in, and then I can see any areas that I'll need to make lighter or darker. So I'm going to concentrate on the tail itself. I will be using a rigger brush, which is the brush which has a much longer narrow bristle to it, and that'll allow me to load it with colour and get some longer strokes for the mane. So I'm going to be working with all the same colours, but starting to bring the longer strokes onto the mane. So this is my Van Dyke brown, and I want to load it. You have to keep stopping because it's a narrow brush. It will carry a fair amount of colour, but I need to do long sweeps of colour, and I'll pick up slightly different shades all the time so that it's not, so I'm getting good highlights coming in. Get some sepia in there as well, because although you can't pick out the hair in sort of individual hairs really clearly, you will get a bit of texture coming through. So I'll end up with little slithers of the light blue, which, as I said earlier, may well be too bright, and I might need to go back and tone them down later, but it's better that they're there. This is a size 1 rigger, so this is a really fine rigger brush, and I want to get the effect of the sort of hair of the mane, trying to just change the angle slightly as I brush down to get a natural look. And it comes right down around the cheek of the horse, sort of jaw, and I will take the lines into the shady part, because even though you can't see it really well, you can, it will add a bit of texture and help with the shaping. need to come down around the base of the ear and bring in some more colour there. Even a bit of the burnt sienna. I'm going to dilute the colour a little bit, I think, up the top here, so it's not quite so strong, and bring in some of the hair around the back of the neck. Falling just over the withers of the horse as well, where its head's down, so I need to go up onto that bit and try and look at the direction that it's falling, not be too heavy-handed, fairly light with the real point of the rigger, and look at the way that it's splaying out. Gone on to a slightly lighter combination. The hairs are quite short up there and a bit thicker. Come down onto the body of the horse, down the neck area, there's some darker sections. Right, see how that looks now. There's a few finer, lighter hairs, so if I dilute some of the colour and pull that out with the tip of the brush, and have some of them cut across the ear and onto the sort of forehead. There's a little cluster there. Right, I'll leave that for the moment. I can come back to that, but I want to get some of the hair in on the tail, so I'm going to go back to my grey, and I want to try and see if I can get some of this sweep in. So I've got to be a little bit free and just go in the general direction. In fact, I think what I'll do is I'll go onto a 4 and I'll put some of this in, not with the rigger but with the size 4 brush. I can load that with more colour and go in the direction that I want the tail to fall, and I'll go back on top with the rigger. I think that might be an easier option. Then I've got some longer, much longer, that I will do with the rigger. There's a bit of compromising to do because some of the hair is very light over here, but I'm not going to be too worried about that. And I've got some hair that falls right down where it's swooshing its tail. whips back on itself. So I want to get a sense of the movement of the tail. So it will take me a little while to build up layers of varying shades of grey. And there's even a little bit of sort of purpley blue in there, I think. I'll bring some brown in as well, I think, to some of this tail down here. We're starting to get some movement. Back up to my bigger brush and back up to the washes. Now it is dark at the top, so I'll strengthen my colour. And then wash some of that down. Bits of that coming through, especially at the top. And back to my rigger, and there's some really reddish brown fine hairs just at the base. It's beginning to work. I want to break up this pale greys, this light patch of tail. Put some darks in between. So I'm just going to carry on building up the tail. We're not that far from being finished on the horse, but the horse is going to need to get anchored to the ground. So I've got to concentrate on the shadow on the hooves and get the shadow onto the ground. I will put some greenery and things into the grass later on, but the last bit I really want to show you is the hooves and the shadow. So I will finish the tail and come back to that. Now that I've completed what I'm going to do on the tail and the mane area, I have lightly sketched, very lightly in pencil, sketched the position that I want for the shadow, because it's a complicated shape, and it weaves in and out between the legs and the hooves. So I've sketched that in first so that I know where I'm going, and I've got a really strong mix of grey and with a bit of my Windsor blue, and I've also put some of the green that I used in the background into the mix as well. So it's a really deep colour, and I'm going to start, because I'm right-handed, I'm going to start from the muzzle of the horse, and I just want to make sure that I have a sort of a bit of a quiver on the outside edge. I don't want it to be too straight, and I'm going to start off by going in between the hooves. Now actually it doesn't really matter whether you paint the hooves first or the background. So in this case I'm going to get the background in place and then go back and do the hooves when this has dried. But I just want to get this in position, alternating between small brushes, size 4 and size 8, so that I can work around the shape, and I keep loading the brush, and this will hopefully be the final thing that succeeds in anchoring the horse to the ground. As I said, I probably will go back and do some more to the ground. So this would be the last thing, really. Once all the grass and everything else is as I want it to be, this would be the last element that I would put in normally. And I'm making sure that I cover my pencil line. I don't want to see the pencil work. So I'm in a bigger section, so I can move up to my bigger brush, because I don't want to have edges, hard lines forming, all to flow. But then small brush to cut in tight to the shapes. Make sure that I come in close to the hoof. I don't like the shape on that, so I'm just going to blot that away with kitchen paper and redo that. It's better. Yeah, that's better. That's got a better shape. So I can load again and come down this side. And again, make sure that I've got a nice uneven outside edge. I want to have enough on the brush that I'm not sort of dragging it. It's well loaded with colour. And again, cutting tight to the fetlock. This side of the hoof. And there's some dark shadow just that comes up the side. Parts of this shape almost disappear into the, you can't discern the hoof from the shadow, so. And it needs to have a nice uneven edge, because if you can imagine, it's sort of travelling over uneven ground, so that's why it's important not to have too sharp or clean cut an outside edge. It's got to have a bit of a quiver to it. So I'll make sure that I've got all the way around the shape. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll let that dry, and then I can see if that's dark enough. If it's not dark enough, I can adapt the colour and come in again. But we need to anchor the back of the hooves down, so I'm going to go in with my Van Dyke brown and a little bit of sepia to make it quite dark, and some areas of the shadow and the hoof almost run together, so I can come in with some real dark down the back of the hoof, and then dip into some water and grade it round with the water. Just use a little bit of water just to lighten that as it comes round. Okay, move on to the next one. Exactly the same thing. Real bit of dark, then into water. Into water again. Fade the colour round the hoof. This one a little bit harder to see, but there's some dark coming right underneath. Round. Then into water again. And pull some of the colour round. Not so much shadow on this one, but a little bit of shadow towards the front, a little bit of shaping towards the front, I should say. Last hoof, bit of the brown underneath, this one is quite hard to read what's going on, so I don't want to, if you can't see it, don't paint what you can't see. I do need to get seen a little bit more dark actually around this section. And you can barely make out the difference between the shadow and I think that brown needs to come down further. I've got too much white showing. It's got to come down more. That's better. Right. Yeah, that's better. So that's basically the painting of the horse. I do need, however, just to take a little bit of light there. I'll make that slightly more orange. Drop some orange tone in. Bit of light coming round. More colour out first, I think. And then drop the orangey tone in. So there might be one or two more tweaks and a little bit more of foliage that I'm going to put onto the grass area. But basically, I think that's the horse itself finished.